video, we're going to cover section 4, which is manually creating a purchase order. So this would be applicable, again, if somebody comes to you and they say, we need more office supplies. We need more of a special tool. We need something against a GL, or we need more of a consumable item that we just buy in bulk and stock on a shelf, or something that you're using more as like a Kanban or a visual pull system. So in this video, we're going to look at just how you would create a purchase order that isn't being generated from something called a material planning page or the planning or requisition worksheets. So again, we'll navigate to our Business Central environment. So at this point, I'm going to use some of my actions because it's on my main role center. Whenever you see the plus in front of your page or list page, that lets you know that that's an action to create a new document. So from here, I can go ahead and just say purchase order. Again, I've got my vendor number. Now, let's say, for example, I'm not used to vendor numbers. I'm used more to names. I can just start typing in the vendor number field. And even though I'm not typing the number, I'm typing the name, the system, again, is very smart. So it's able to understand the type of data that I'm looking for. It pulled in the vendor name. It pulled in the address information from the vendor card. So as we discussed earlier, if, for example, I was dealing with a specific contact person, I could use my 3 dots here. I could then change my contact for this specific order to a specific person. It's asking me to confirm that I want to change the buy from. I do. It's got a different pay to. So I've then committed that change. Because I had selected a contact, they have a different email, so that contact email has come in. If I had a mobile phone number, a phone number associated, that would have also updated. I have a document date. So this references the date that the document was created inside of my ERP system. I have a posting date. So this reflects the date that I would post a receipt or post an invoice. So this is actually not relevant at all when you're creating a purchase order. Due date, this is misleading. This is the due date for payment prediction. So this would be if I were to post this purchase order today, when would I need to pay the supplier? So a lot of times what I do is I will modify my page to remove the noise in the fields that I don't need. And I'll move other fields maybe to other sections just to make my system a little bit more plug and play. So from the gear up here, you can click on personalize. And let's say I decided I wanted to move the posting date just down a little bit because it's something that I use at receiving and invoicing. So I'm just moving it a little bit out of the way. Same thing with vendor shipment number. This is something that I'm going to enter my vendor packing slip in during receipt. So again, I'm going to move it down. Certain fields like responsibility center are more for companies with multiple businesses within one entity, not something widely used. So let's say I don't need that on my screen. I can right click on my triangle or left click, and I'm going to say to just remove that. We've done lots of videos on personalization, so more to come on that, but that's just a bit of a snapshot. Again, if I want to drag and drop, so the due date, because it is more related to my invoicing activity, I'm just going to drag this down below. Expected receipt date. This is the date that's actually the date that I need my product in-house and usable. So I'm just going to switch those two, and I'm going to move my expected receipt date up to my header. Maybe I want to keep my dates all together. Once this is all said and done, I'm going to click on done. This personalization is just for me, just on my pages. There is an opportunity to configure an entire profile for a list of users, but when you use the personalize function, you're creating the pages with a look and feel that you've set. So as mentioned, document date is the date that you're creating the document in your ERP. Order date would be the date that you're the order was placed with the supplier. So you might have called in the order on the phone or sent them an email. That allows you to be able to set and pick the right direct unit cost if you've got special purchase pricing set up with starting and ending dates. And then, as I mentioned, expected receipt date would be when you want the product in-house and usable. So I'm keying this in. If you wanted, you could just type a number, and when you tab off, it assumes current month and current year. If you do a T and tab off, the system would assume today's date. Lots of different shortcuts. Please feel free to reach out to me if you want a list of those shortcuts. Vendor invoice number is something that the accounts payable person will enter in when they receive the invoice, so not required for purchase order entry. Purchaser code. This would allow you to be able to associate the buyer. If you've got a buyer set up on the vendor card, this would have defaulted in. When you create a purchase order, if any information defaulted from the master record, you can change it on the purchase order, and it only affects that PO. So as an example, let's say Helen is typically the first up consultant buyer. However, she's on vacation, and I would want people to know that I'm the buyer for this purchase order, so if there's any questions, to come to me. If this had defaulted in from the vendor card, I could just select a different person, and then for this document only, people know to come to me. I haven't changed the master record. I haven't changed the default. I just changed the specific scenario. You have the ability to archive your purchase orders. There are some companies who, every time there is a change made to the PO, they like to take a snapshot of that PO so that they can see all the different iterations and the versions of that purchase order. You can do that. It's a personal choice. If you don't need that, the system will automatically archive a version when you post a receipt or an invoice automatically. But during PO creation, typically, you don't have any versions yet. If this purchase order had been generated from a quote, we would be able to see that here. Of course, we're manually creating a purchase order and we're starting with a purchase order. So that field is not able to be editable, and it's something that's not populated. If you've got a vendor order number where you have to go into maybe a vendor's online portal, or maybe it's something that you've ordered online and the vendor would have their own purchase order number for this, in this purchase order number field, that gives you the ability to reference how they may look at this document. So you have a reference to your internal purchase order and their purchase order number. Some vendors have multiple order addresses. If they do, you have the ability to indicate those alternate vendor address codes. When you drop down this list, if there are any associated to that vendor, you would be able to select that from the list. When you see new and select from full list, this means that you or people at your company will dictate what that list is consisting of. So in this example, we just don't have any for this specific record. But when you are using Business Central, if you do find that when you drop down the list, it's not quite the data that you need to see, you might need to add more to it. You might even want to take some things away and clean it up. Whenever you see new and select from full list, please know that you are able to do so and you're able to dictate that. Assigned user ID. So this is really just a lookup to any of the users that are created in your system. It's not mandatory, but if you've got different approval flows or you want different people to take a look at it, the purchase order might be assigned to different people at different times. You can use that field so that people can focus on just their orders if you'd like. Currently, this is in the open status, which means that I haven't committed this. It's not sent to the vendor yet. I can update and add to this as I need to. Skip over the line section for a little bit. We'll just finish off here with some of these extra fast tabs. So the invoicing detail really gets related to the financial side. Your currency code, if it's blank, means that whatever dollars are on this means that's your system currency. So I can see here that I'm in a Canadian company. So my currency code being blank means that this purchase order is in Canadian dollars. If I've got other vendors where I need to pay them in US dollars, I would see a currency code in this field only if it's different from my local currency. The due date, as I mentioned, so this is looking at my payment terms, and it's looking at the date that's in my header as a posting date, and it's saying, well, if you then posted this PO invoice today, you would have to pay it by the 30th. If I changed my payment terms to, let's say, COD, my due date updates, because again, it's used as like a payment prediction type of function. You have posting groups in your system, so when you actually post this receipt and invoice, that's how it knows which GL accounts to be writing to. You can see how you typically pay the vendor. You can set up what's called dimensions in the system, which is typically dictated by your financial team. If you are using dimensions, you should be trained on that, and you may at receiving time need to enter them or confirm them. If they're responsible for taxes, you can see that they will be set as tax liable. So in the early phases of a project, sometimes some of the settings are incorrectly set. So if you find that this is a supplier where you would be tax liable and you need taxes to calculate and they are not calculating, one of the things to check would be that the invoice details have indicated that this is a taxable PO. You can indicate how the product is typically shipped to you. So again, you see new and select from full list. So if there are things that are missing, please add them. If there are things you don't need, you can always click on select from full list. If the group agrees, you can use your 3 dots and you can remove what isn't necessary. Some fields we're just skipping over because they aren't really widely used. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions on any of them. And of course, we'll have a tutoring session to go over anything that needs more clarification. But the other thing that people typically look for is, for example, maybe warehouse handling times. So this can default in from your location, but when you set the expected receipt date, that is the date that the product should be in-house and ready for use. If you indicate in your system that you need 1 day where the product is maybe on site, but you need to do quality checks or you need to just get time to receive it in your system, you can indicate a handling time that you have internally. And again, this can just default in or be set specifically on the PO, but then that will drive your purchase order so that you can tell the vendor it needs to be received even earlier. So we'll start to see that when we look at the lines. Lead time calculation, that would pull in off the vendor if they had a standard lead time. Of course, that's something that you can always set on your item specifically, as a lot of times the lead time is set by the item itself, not necessarily the vendor. The requested receipt date, so again, that would be when the part should be physically in-house. Promised receipt date, this could be if, let's say, for example, you had indicated that you wanted the product in on April 15th, the supplier says, I'm really sorry, I actually can't make that date. It's going to be 4/17. You could put in a promised receipt date once you get that new date, which lets you know what the vendor has promised to you. If you choose to, you can maintain these different dates, and then you could do some statistical analysis later where you might want to do some comparisons on, when do you order things to when you receive them? What dates are you asking for? What dates are they committing to? There's lots of different dates in the system, but the key one really is going to be your expected delivery date, which we talked about up here, because this one is the one that lets you know when that product needs to be usable. Under shipping and payment, so you can indicate when you're creating the purchase order where you want the product shipped to. So if you have default set, it's just going to look at your general company information and use that address. You could indicate a specific location. So if you're a company that has multiple locations or warehouses set, you could select that. Customer address would be something to use if you're using a drop ship. So if you needed the vendor to just send it directly to your customer, you could select customer address. And if it's a straight one-off address, you could enter that and you would just key in the address and it would just be for that order and it wouldn't be saved. The pay to, so this lets you know when you do post the invoice which vendors should have the balance on their account and the check for the EFT be made to. And then you've got a remit to code, which again allows you to be able to enter remit to information. The system fully supports prepayments. So if there is an agreement or there's a stipulation that you can't receive anything until you've paid an invoice, that is fully supported in the system. And again, we can deep dive into that in a live session. Once you select your vendor, most of the information that gets updated is your date information or maybe the buyer. A lot of the other information really does just stay static from the vendor card. So now if we jump into the line detail and talking about exactly what we want to order, very similar to what we saw in a blanket purchase order video or on the purchase quote video, you have the ability to purchase directly to a GL account, which again is very common for one-off or special buys. You can purchase items, even if they're non-inventory items, as long as there's an item master record for them. You can purchase them. You can purchase resources, which can be very common for services or special charges like freight or brokerage. You could purchase to fixed assets. Charge items are so that when you do the receiving, if you wanted to, for example, have a freight charge and you wanted to be able to assign the cost of that freight charge to increase the cost of the item, that is fully supported in Business Central as well. So GL account is used for freight. That's when you want to just make sure that you can pay for that freight. Charge item is an opportunity to increase the cost of the item. That is something that you would confirm with your accounting team as to how you would address it. You can add comments to the lines. So for the sake of this session, we're just going to focus on adding some items and we'll add a comment. So because I've got type selected as item, I'm going to drop down my list and I would see a list of the items in my system. So again, this is anything that would have an item master record. It could be set as being a inventory type item, meaning that you track inventory, it has a value, or it can be set as a non-inventory item. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll select this mobile pedestal. An item reference is the ability, if your vendor has their own part ID for this exact item, on the item card, you can set up what's called an item reference. And that would allow you to cross-reference to be able to say, well, I personally call it a 1906S, but my customer calls it a AMP-123. And again, that gives you the ability to be able to put that onto purchase documents and make that visible for your supplier. If it's not set up, you can just leave it blank and you could hide it from your screen if it's something that you wouldn't use. The description will pull in off the master record. So this is a description from my item card. The location code is where my inventory is going to increase into upon receipt. So in this case, I'll select that I want to receive it to my main location. If you're using bins, because the location is set up to use bins, you will also need to have a bin associated on the line. Bins are something that are set up at the location level. Some companies require bins, some do not. So this will be something that you can play with. If bins are required by your location setup, if you try to post a receipt of your purchase order without a bin, it'll just stop you and tell you to enter one. Not a big deal, it's just something that you need to be aware of in your setups. Quantity. So this lets you know the quantity that you want to order. So we'll just put in a quantity of 10 here. You have the ability to do reservations. So if you wanted to be able to say, well, this purchase order has to be used on a specific production order, you could do that. A lot of the times reservations sound like a good idea, and then later you find that they're frustrating because you need to use that inventory on another order, but it is something, again, we can explore. Unit of measure code. So this will show you any units of measure that have been associated to the item. So in this case, I've told the system that I only deal with this item in pieces. If, for example, I could get that pedestal, let's say in a set, I could set up on the item card a second unit of measure called set. And then I would just tell the system that when I'm talking about a set, I have 2 pieces that I would receive. Or technically, I'm ordering 2 items. So this is something that can be set up on an item by item level. It is something that is fully supported by Business Central. So if you have certain items where you stock it in one unit, you purchase it in another, maybe even sell it in another unit of measure, you will need an item unit of measure conversion so that the system understands the math depending on which unit you're transacting with. In this case, because we only have the one, we only have one selection. The direct unit cost, so that will come in off of your item card. The system will look to see if you have any special pricing or price breaks that have been set up, or it will just look at your main item card for the last direct cost. This can be changed. So if, for example, you said, well, with current times, this is now increased, I've spoken to the vendor, this is something that you can absolutely change when you make your purchase order. On the line, we've indicated that this is a taxable item, but the master record did not say which area is taxing. So this looks like it was missing. So I can add that as soon as I indicate that it's taxable and which jurisdiction, so it knows which percentage to use. Down here, we can see that our taxes were added. Because I'm ordering 10 pieces, it's $525 per piece. My line amount has come to show me that it's $5,250 for me to purchase 10 of this product. There's no blanket order here, so I can see that it's not from any kind of blanket order. You will receive and you will invoice from the purchase order line, which is a little bit unique in NAV or Business Central than some other ERP systems. So for order entry, obviously the quantity to receive and invoice are not applicable. You can see here on the line that you can set specific dates. So we had initially on our purchase header set the date of the product. But let's say you said, well, I'm going to want 10 of these every week for the next 4 weeks. You could, on the exact same PO, add the same item multiple times, and I'm just going to click F8 to copy the line above. And then in my date field, I could just make this 22. And then I could add another where I'm adding 29. And then I could add another. So what this does is it allows me within my purchase document to create a delivery schedule. So it allows me on one PO to be able to let my vendor know, hey, I'm going to want 40 of this product, but I want you to deliver it to me on this different schedule. Now you'll notice that I've got a planned receipt date that is a day before my expected receipt date. This is because of that warehouse handling time that I had set up. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm telling the system, I'm planning to receive this on the 14th because I'm expecting to use this on the 15th. And I've indicated that I have a 1-day warehouse handling time. So again, I manually added that to this purchase document. It can default in from your location card. On the line, you've got department and customer group. In this test company, those are dimensions that had been set up. If you guys have special tags that you want to add to a purchase line, then you would be able to set that. Over receipt quantity and over receipt code. There is a setup in the system where you could set up thresholds to say, if my order quantity is X, I can over receive up to X%. So you can set up as many of these as you want to. In this case here, if we take a look, I have one called over receipt 10. I'm saying that I can receive up to 10% more than my order quantity before you're telling me that I have an issue. So you might have for certain items, you could say, well, this item I can do up to 20%, other items I can do up to 10. No problem. You can set them up and then you associate them to the item. You can even just set it up on the line level. As I mentioned, you can purchase to a GL. So here, if I were to say, I want to select an expense to that specific GL, so I can see that, not a very good description has come in. This is a description from my chart of account. So here I can overwrite this with whatever it is that I want to buy. Oh, SKU number. Here we go. So there you're just going to put in a description based on what it is that you need. Typically you're using a GL for something that you don't need a master record for. It's not something that you buy all the time. Could be a service, could be, like I said, office supplies or some consumable that you just expense. You wouldn't need a location for GL lines. You would still want a quantity. And of course, you'd want to put in whatever the price is. So we can see down below, as we're adding lines and as we're adding details, you've got your subtotal, you've got your tax, and then you've got your grand total. You can also add comments. So you can associate comments that are standard, meaning that they're just sort of sitting there and you're just going to pull them as you need them. Or you can add comments that are just free form. You write them in when you need them. On item cards, if you have comments that you say, well, every single time I order this item, I want the drawing number to come in, or I want specific comments or information to pull in. You can absolutely associate that standard comment to an item card. You can have that comment automatically insert when the item is added to a purchase order, or under functions, you could just insert that comment whenever you need it. Again, if those are options that we need, we can go ahead and explore those in a live session. Once you've got your purchase order information, you can go ahead under print and send. You can print a physical copy of your purchase order document. You can choose to archive or take a snapshot at that point. If you're just previewing it to the screen, I would recommend that you send to a PDF document. This is what it's going to look like if it printed to a physical printer, or this is going to show you what your supplier would see. If you use just the preview button, that's going to show you a lot of what the PO would look like, but it could be cosmetically not quite the same. It could drop a bit of information. So just something to be cognizant of. On the page here, you have different report layout options. So if you had a scenario where you said, well, in this case, I want different terms and conditions than another case, you could select different layouts when you print the purchase order if you need to. The other more popular version these days is going to be that you just send the purchase order. So when you click on the send, it's going to look at your vendor. It's going to look at what send means for them. If your send means that it's to send it to a printer, it'll print to a printer. If your send means that you're going to print it to email, but it prompts you for settings before it sends, it will give a dialog box to prompt you. If you wanted to send an email and just use whatever email setup properties you have, it can also do that. Attach as PDF, what this will do is this will actually attach a copy of the purchase order to the document. So now if I look here at attachments, I can click on my attachments and I will see there is a copy of that purchase order directly in this purchase order document. This isn't as helpful, obviously, when I have the purchase order open and available to me. But when I post a purchase receipt, it will flow to the receipt. When I post it through to the invoice, it will pull through to the invoice. So it's a nice feature to be able to have a copy of the PO in the receipt and the invoice document, but it also maybe can be cumbersome in the fact that it will take up database space because attachments always do. You can attach by choosing additional files. So if you wanted to attach a drawing, if you wanted to attach an email, you can go ahead and choose from a local directory. It will show you what type of extension it is. It'll show you who attached it and when. This flow to purchase transactions, that indicates when you want to actually have this also be an attachment on the receipt and the invoice. On a purchase transaction, this is called a fact box over here. So if you quickly wanted to jump into the vendor card, this is a hyperlink. You can quickly do that. If you wanted to quickly see how this balance came to be, you can click on this and it shows you all of the invoices that are outstanding. So over here, this is just basically a snapshot of a little bit more detail. You can jump quickly into the item card if you choose. Your availability would show you based on the purchase receipt what you'll have available to you. If there's any special pricing or special discounts associated to the item, again, you're able to see that. You can close the fact box here if that's something where it's taking up a lot of real estate, you don't want to see it. You can archive additional documents. So again, let's say you come in and you want to make a change to the comment, or you make a change to the cost, you make a change to the quantity. The system won't automatically take a snapshot so that you can see that history. But if you want it, because you want it to be able to see how you've changed the PO over time, you can go ahead and just say archive. And now you've created a snapshot of the purchase order at that point in time. Once you've sent the purchase order to the supplier, the best practice is to change the status to released. This update so then everybody would know the vendor should be aware of this purchase order and it's on order. If after the fact you said, oof, I really need another one of those pedestals. If you try to update the quantity, the system is telling you the status must be equal to open in the purchase header. So if you stop and read the Business Central errors, they're actually quite good, and it is a good practice to get into because you can almost always solve whatever issue you're facing. So all this is telling me is it's saying, hey, the vendor's aware of this purchase order. You might need to make, a phone call or an email or send a new document. So I just hit the refresh button. All I would do in that case is I would reopen my purchase order. I can then change the cost or the quantity or whatever it is I need to. If I want, I can go ahead and resend a copy of the purchase order. Maybe I just have to tap a note and send an email or call. But then again, I'm just going to re-release that once it's all said and done. You have the ability to be able to copy purchase documents. So if you've got orders that you've done in other scenarios and you say, oh, it'd be really nice if I could just copy that, we'll cover that and other things in their own little separate videos. But you can also create purchase order templates. If the vendor has specific discounts that you get for the total of an order, there's functions to run that and see if there's discounts. We've discussed the print and send options. Business Central supports approval flows. So if, for example, you've got purchasing members, maybe they've got a threshold where they can create POs up to $10,000, then it has to go to a supervisor. That just means that that user, when they go to release it, it will tell them that they need an approval. That user can then send an approval request. It would then go to their manager. Once that's been approved, then it can be released. If it gets rejected, then you'll have to make other arrangements. As I mentioned, dimensions are an ability to be able to tag two purchase orders so that you can see different purchasing dimensions or analytics at the end of the year. You can add comments to purchase orders. So if there is a comment that you need to add, you can add that. This really just applies to this entire PO as a whole. You can choose to, if that comment's then in the header, if you want to have it print on forms and reports, we can certainly help you to do that. This would show you any of the approvals that have gone through. If we had done any invoices against this purchase order, any receipts, we'd be able to see that. If we needed to jump into the vendor cart, we could easily do that from the PO. So what you will find in Business Central is that as you start navigating around, there's typically multiple ways to get to the same place. So if I look at the vendor button here, that would have been no different than if I had kept my fact box open and drilled into the vendor this way. If I look at the attachments, this button is no different than if I had clicked on my attachments and drilled into it this way. So really with Business Central, with any system really, you just want to use it as much as you can and get used to the way that feels the best for you. Again, on the right-hand side, when you start looking at functions, you're going to be able to see some of the same buttons and fields. Again, they're just two different ways to get there. And again, we'll do more videos on some of the extra features like copying, recurring documents, drop shipments, etc. Overall, that's just sort of a snapshot of creating a standalone purchase order. Again, we're going to do lots of different videos on receiving and copying, but this will just get you started.